Everybody. Good morning and good afternoon, almost good evening in the UK. I think I know most everyone here, but for those that I've not met yet, I'm Jeff O'Keefe. I'm the Executive Director of Zen Peacemakers, and I welcome you to our members circle. And we are so delighted and honored to have our uh, friend and new affiliate. We got somebody else joining here now too. Uh, Rōshi Genjō Marinello of Choboji in Seattle, Seattle Zen Temple, a Rinzai practice center in Seattle, my old home state. Um, and Roshi will be talking about his just released book um, on awakening and maturity, and we, we don't so overtly try to do a commercial promotion of anything here, but do take a look at Roshi's book. It's available on Amazon and highly recommended. So I don't want to take up the airspace. I'd like to pass over to Roshi. Georgia, welcome, and Sasha and Nicole. I see that you've just come in now too. So glad you're able to join us. Roshi, I'll hand this over to you and let you lead us through. Thank you again so much for doing this for us.
Thank you, Jeff. I don't know, can I see a show of hands of how many people have the book already? Okay. All right. It's a bit of a memoir that goes through my life journey of especially working with spiritual companions, and from my parents all the way through Bernie Glassman and Joan Halifax and all of my teachers in between. And the whole topic is about the difference between what we call awakening and what we might term as maturity. So the whole book looks at that. I think all of us, beginning with the Shakyamuni Buddha, wonder about our suffering. How is it that we suffer on this planet so much? And of course, we know from the First Noble Truth that life is dukkha and that there's certain things that are completely natural and unavoidable, having to do with the pain of birth, growing pains, the pain of adolescence, the pain of young adulthood, pain of sickness, old age, and death. But on top of that, we all know that the human condition complicates things immensely, and we suffer exponentially, especially in the way that we treat each other. I was abused as a child by my father, and I had dreams of nuclear holocaust, as many people did when they were young and around my age. We would do something called duck and cover in an elementary school, and that was somehow going to protect us from a nuclear blast, living through the Cold War and the Cuban Missile Crisis. But my dreams of being the last person on Earth after a nuclear holocaust, or in a concentration camp and something like Auschwitz, why did I keep having these dreams as a middle-aged adult? Investigating this, I realized it went back to my early abuse history, and it made me curious, very curious, about how it is that we collectively can treat each other so poorly, whether it's within the family or between tribes or between nations or on a world scale, as the atrocities that have happened in World War II, or the genocides that have happened all over the place, including here in the United States, with the displacement and elimination of the Native American population to make room for the second wave of immigration, European immigration to this continent, and trying to elimination of Jews and other undesirables from the Nazi perspective in Germany, or what happened recently in the old Yugoslavia, or in between China and Japan and Nanking, or in Rwanda. And how can we be so dark and terrible to each other repeatedly? This drew me to not just towards awakening and feeling kind of blissed out, as I sometimes have felt in meditation. This doesn't seem to be enough to head off our complicated instincts of survival, which pit our most based instincts of survival and protection of the family and the tribe against each other. And so the whole book is about investigating the human condition by looking at one life, my life, and doing 5 different bearing witness retreats, 3 of them at Auschwitz-Birkenau. The last one would have been with Bernie. It was the first Auschwitz-Birkenau retreat, this third one that I attended, that in 20 years that Bernie hadn't attended. And we learned on, I think it was November 4th, that Bernie had died while we were in retreat. Anyway, investigating this question of how complex we are and how complex the human condition is, and that awakening is relatively simple and glorious and not to be missed. On the other hand, it's not nearly enough to unscramble our most base sort of limbic brain, or very primitive brain functions that can tear us apart. And so the whole book explores the pathways to awakening, and then certainly borrowing Bernie's 3 tenets of a way to explore the unknown and the depth of our being, and to bear witness to our own trials and tribulations and troubles, personal, family, state, and international. And to, as we know, in bearing witness to this, investigating by not knowing, and then sitting in that together, we begin to have some insights that eventually lead to some actions that can bring not just peace of mind, but peace in the world. And it's this kind of journey that I think we're all on, really. And learning how to integrate spiritual exploration and human psychology, and what's the difference between awakening and the ability to unscramble ourselves in such a way that we are far less likely to be ruled or confused by our most primitive instincts of survival, which, when they're frustrated, can become horribly sadistic. And so by exploring all of that with my spiritual companions over a lifetime of, I'm now 66, but the book was written pretty much when I was 65. So 65 years of exploration of these subjects, trying to investigate, much as the historical Buddha did, is why is the human condition so exponentially stuck in its own suffering? And we see it all around us. All you have to do is open up the newspaper or turn on the television, and you can see our exponential suffering and how poorly we care for each other. And awakening or spiritual practice is just not enough. And even healthy psychological maturity is not enough. But if you somehow can put awakening and psychological maturity together and blend them, then I think we learn how to begin to regularly and consistently substitute our ability for insight over our the demands of our instincts of survival, which, when again frustrated, and we're all frustrated on some level because we're the only animal that realizes that we're all going to die. So our instincts of survival are always on in high gear, and it creates a kind of existential angst in all of us, whether we're aware of it or not, that kind of drives us crazy. I mean, a lot of different animals out there understand death. I've seen dolphins, dogs, horses, cows, many animals understand, chimpanzees, lots of animals understand death. I'm not sure that there's any animal that understands we're all going to die and that we can't survive. And this creates a certain tension that I think is a big part of our problem. So learning how to have a foundation that can tap something beyond our instincts of survival, and then become, as one of my early teachers said, simple, clear, and direct, by continuing to ground ourselves in something beyond our narrow egoistic perspective and getting good at that. And then learning how to practice bringing that center of gravity or ground of being out into the world. And we start, I think, to be able to do that when we can bring our peace of mind or meditation mind into simple activities like sweeping the floor, or cleaning the toilet, or working in the garden, or preparing a meal, or cleaning up afterwards. But our life is much more complex than these simple tasks. How do we bring that peace of mind into our most complex situations? And here's one life journey that's represented in this book that looks at this question of how do we bring our spiritual practice and psychological maturity weave together in such a way that we can be in the world of our exponentially amplified suffering and be a part of the solution rather than the problem going forward. I think every bearing witness retreat that I've been on, I've come away with a better understanding of the human condition and just how messed up it can be, and also a better understanding and groundedness that accepting that truth, that I am a little bit more mature year after year in my ability not to get so angry or hooked or make things worse rather than better. In my personal interactions with Sangha members, with family members, with clients, um, my with politicians, with neighbors, with homeless population, with the indigenous peoples here in the Pacific Northwest, working hard on helping them survive and hold their culture together. The Duwamish, we're close to the Duwamish River here in Seattle, and this is the original Salish tribe of the Duwamish territory. We have a close relationship with them. And we work here in Seattle on something called the Faith Action Network, which is an interfaith um, organization that works on essentially state legislation. Like, for example, we were very much behind getting a number of laws passed in this legislature to curtail the possibility of the overuse of force by the police and more accountability by the police. And I've worked hard on trying to get the state to eliminate the death penalty and things like that. These are things, and work with our indigenous populations in a productive, healthy way. These are things that we work on regionally here. In our temple is a member now of two organizations. As a temple, we're members of the Faith Action Network, which is this regional group that works on essentially state issues, and then Zen Peacemakers International. Now as an affiliate group, regional group, and teaching center. We hope that next year, by the way, that a number of our Sangha members here in the United States would like to work with the leadership that is already developed on the subject of systemic racism in the United States. And maybe, as things are opening up around COVID-19, to work closely with other members of ZPI to perhaps do more than a Zoom plunge and get back to being able to do a live bearing witness retreat, perhaps 5 days in Mobile, Alabama, or someplace in the deep South. And there's a lot of interest here of Chobuji members who would like to participate in that and help to organize it if it can come to pass. So this journey, though, of how do we go from our very complicated human condition and diminish the exponential suffering that we bring upon ourselves, as Bernie would say, because we end up being in these little isolated tribes that fight each other, and how to get past our instincts of survival, which gives such loyalty to our survival of our family and our tribe, and we end up harming each other and killing each other and being sadistic to each other. And I've been trying to unscramble that koan my whole life, and this book is about that exploration. So I will close with those remarks, I think, and open it up to questions. I should also say that I have a background as a psychotherapist. I've been practicing for quite a few decades as a psychotherapist and a licensed mental health counselor. And also I have a background being trained by Jesuit priests in community organizing, and also a background with the local Quaker meeting here in Seattle, of which my wife and I are both members. So that's other parts of my background.
Thank you, Rōshi. And we have a small enough group that and I really encourage everyone to, you know, to share or ask a question or a perspective. But we have a small enough group that I can see everyone. So if you want to, let's just watch for one another so we don't speak over. Um, and but if you want to just wave your hand and then unmute yourself if you have something to offer the conversation or a question to pose to Roshi. Yoshin, hi.
Hi, I have my electronic hand up.
I, I see that.
Thank you so much, Roshi, for the great insight into the importance of bringing the awakening to psychosocial um, maturity, um, the importance of combining them in our lives to truly practice our Zen. My question, though, has to do with one of the core tenets of Buddhism, namely Mahayana Buddhism, is uh, is Buddha nature. We're inherently um, Buddha nature, and to realize that and to incorporate that into our daily life, according to Dogen, whose teachings that we all subscribe to, or most of us do, is to uh, just sit, shikantaza, just sit, and then we go out and do, incorporate the practice into our daily lives. So, and you mentioned at our basic nature or basic instinct, or at survival mode. Um, could you speak to that vis-a-vis Buddha nature that we are inherent?
So our instincts of survival are also Buddha nature. There's nothing wrong with that. It's like a slice of Buddha nature that becomes so dominant, in my view, that it overwhelms the rest of Buddha nature. And we're very fortunate that we can sink beneath our egoistic perspective. There's nothing wrong with our egoistic perspective. If we didn't have an egoistic perspective, we would perhaps be psychotic. So it's egoistic perspective is also a slice of Buddha nature. And so that's important. But when our egoistic perspective, which is dominated by our instincts of survival, is so loud because we haven't connected to something beyond that. There's nothing wrong with that. It's necessary. But the Buddha nature is much bigger than that. And our instincts of survival and our narrow egoistic perspective is just a teeny, teeny slice. So when we only have that much, it's like having blinders on. And our meditation practice, shikantaza, can open us up to a much broader perspective, and we feel much more connected and in communion with something beyond ourselves, whatever that is. We can leave that to be unnameable. But just that reaction alone is not enough. We have to learn how to, over time, over decades, really how to integrate our broad perspective with our narrow perspective, because otherwise what at least has happened for me is that this narrow egoistic perspective snaps back very, very quickly when I am threatened or people close to me are threatened. And how do I have enough practice to connect seamlessly with something beyond that narrow egoistic perspective in such a regular way? And that's why we have practice, and that's why we continue to practice. So shikantaza is so important. And yet sometimes what happens is that we get this broad perspective and we feel this wonderful communion with something, the beyond, or the unknowing, and we think, well, now I'm finished. No, now we've just begun. We have just enough perspective to begin. Uh, this narrow egoistic perspective is so strong and snaps back so easily that learning how to be stretched out like this in a broader perspective, a broader communion of Buddha nature, is very difficult to sustain, very difficult to sustain. And it takes a lot of integration to learn how to sustain the broad Buddha nature perspective or non-egoistic perspective, and have this not snap back and dominate all the time. And the book is a lot about my struggles of learning how to do that.
Thanks for that question, Myoshin, and for your answer, Rōshi. Noah, I see your hand up, Noah. I don't see your face, but that's okay. Please go ahead, unmute yourself, and if you have a comment or a question.
Rōshi, thank you so much for your time and all of your insights. I was curious if you might have any insights on, you discussed dealing with trying to get laws passed for the First for your local indigenous community in the state legislature, and I'd be curious to know what your personal experiences have been trying to have and emphasize Buddha nature while also dealing in a political sphere and around politics, which can be so heightened at times.
Great question.
I feel very, very fortunate to be in Washington State, where we have what essentially became the Washington Council of Churches, which would be Christian churches, state level Christian churches trying to do things together, and became an interfaith organization that includes Muslims and Sikhs and Jews and just every kind of variety, Buddhists, and that we all, and I sit on something called the Interfaith Leadership Council of the Faith Action Network here in Washington State. And we, as religious leaders from all these different faiths, sit down on a table together. And then we have hired, essentially, our director is a lobbyist at the state legislature, and he will inform us, what can we do as people of faith? In other words, people of faith in something beyond our narrow egoistic perspective. What can we do collectively that we could all agree on to contact our state legislators and our governor and say, these small things we could get through the state legislature this year, let's work on it. And these little changes would make it better for the whole state. And we've been making progress, steady progress. We'll work on 10 things and get 3 or 4 of them passed in 1 year, and then we roll them around and bring them up the next year. But in general, in the time that I've been associated with this organization, we've been making slow dents and changes in our state legislature so that we have a better relationship on so many different social issues than we did when we got started. And so I'm very happy that I can participate at that kind of level here. I also was trained as a community organizer, and so I know the power of working at a neighborhood level, and it can be more than votes and signing petitions and talking to politicians. Sometimes taking some direct action is needed. I remember one time when I was working as a community organizer, and there was something simple as a crosswalk next to a school that wasn't there and really needed to be there. And we kept working with the engineering department of the city trying to get this done, and it didn't happen. So the neighbors got together and we painted our own crosswalk. Now this upset the engineering department to no end, but they came out the next day and painted the crosswalk themselves. Or another time there was a absentee landlord who had let a property become very run down in the central area of the city, and it had become very rat infested, and it was full of junk. And we kept petitioning the city to do something about it, about this absentee landlord, and they would put things on the door and say this is a condemned space, and that he had to do something about it. And the absentee landlord never did anything about it. So we as neighbors all got together. We got our little trucks and pickups, and we cleaned up the property ourselves. We just went on the property, cleaned it up, picked up all the stuff, found out where the absentee landlord had lived in a very nice neighborhood about 5 miles away, and we brought all that junk to his place. And we happened to call the press too, so there were TV cameras. And you know, the very next week, that whole property had been cleaned and the building had been torn down. So there are lots of ways to work as neighbors, and at a local level, at a state level, and then even we meet with our senators. The Faith Action Network meets with our senators for national issues at least twice a year, and our governor twice a year. And so we're making small but real progress, and we're trying to sustain peace of mind as we make these small changes.
Thank you, Rōshi. Sandro, my friend from Brazil, you have your hand up, I think, or I saw that earlier. Yep.
Yeah, I would like to ask. I'm currently doing training in Doula of Death and Buddhist theology, and would like to help as a chaplain in the future. What advice from the heart would you give? And I'm starting a community of Zen makers here in Brazil too. If you want to give some advice too, I accept it.
Well, there's so much power in bearing witness, right? And especially in times of life transition, the fact that we can be with, if I heard you correctly, if we can be with people who are in hospice or at times of great stress or surgery, it's how do we bring our peace, in other words, our broader perspective, and it's infectious. If we can be in communion with something beyond ourselves, other people feel it. All we have to do is be present with other people and they feel it. But we ourselves have to work, I think, every day to be in that broader perspective without letting that narrow egoistic perspective snap back too thickly. But when we are connected to something beyond ourselves, other people will feel it. And when we are bearing witness and with other people, then that has a great impact. Recently, just 3 weeks ago, I donated a kidney to my half-sister in Phoenix, Arizona, and I went down with the intention that there wasn't going to be a single care person on my care team who didn't feel that I was being lovingly present to their efforts. And so in the hospital, I think they said, oh, he's a very cooperative patient, but it was more than that. I just was very kind to everyone who was trying to be of service to me, and letting them do that and poke me and prod me and cut me and all these different things, and just follow their instruction with grace and with peace of mind. And when I did show up at my sister's hospital room shortly after the operation, 1 week after the operation, the nurses there on my sister's team could not believe that I was the person who had just given the kidney. They said, you know, he doesn't look like anything's happened to him. Now, I'm very thankful to the care team that took my kidney. They must have done a very good job. But all in all, I think I was able to not only recover smoothly, but be not just a cooperative patient, but a loving presence for those who were trying to care for me, just by witnessing their good efforts and being with them while they tried to care for me. And then that elicited even more care from them, right? I mean, the care brought on care.
I was muted. Thank you, Rōshi and Sandro, for that. We have plenty of time. If someone has a comment or a question, don't be shy. Is it? Do I say Nicola or Nicola?
Nicola.
Okay. Hi, Nicola. Please go ahead.
I'm
And
not
then
very good in English, but I like the word blend together, and I think this is a word that goes together with Genjō for me. Blend together in all ways of practicing, in the way what influences you in your practice to have a wide range. You can learn from very different places, and you can practice in different places in this hospital or somewhere else. That's for me, this is one thing that is really connected with Genjō, that he can blend together all the different possibilities. And I appreciate this very much.
It's very nice to see many people from the Bonn and Cologne Sangha, Daniel and Rainer and Nicola and Sonia. These are all people who once a year I try to get to Deutschland and lead a 5-day retreat. And it's very, very gratifying to have you all on the call this morning.
And Nicole, I think I saw your hand up, and if I'm not mistaken, you're calling from Australia. Is that correct?
No, from Austria.
Austria. Okay, I'm sorry.
Austria, Europe.
Good to see you.
Yeah, good to see you. I think before I ask my question, I just have to make sure that I got it right, that you are in a way combining elements of Buddhism and psychotherapy to enrich your practice. Is that right?
That's correct.
And because listening, I was wondering if this is a rather Western approach with, you know, the person being so much in the center, and that there might be other cultures, and as you're also working with First Nation people, if you think that this model can also be applied in the same way to other cultures.
Well, a lot of it is based on my work as a psychotherapist and working with also as a certificated spiritual director and also as a Zen abbot. So those are the realms or the modalities that I work with, so that's what I speak from. So I don't know, you know, I can't speak from outside of the modalities that I'm immersed in. And I don't want to pretend that those modalities work for everyone. but it's the modalities that I juggle or work with are these different modalities that I've, spent 65 years immersing myself in. I do think that all of us in all cultures have different ways of connecting to something beyond our narrow egoistic perspective, which is great. It doesn't have to be Buddhism for sure. It could be any other. The indigenous First Peoples definitely have their ways, or Aboriginal cultures around the world have their ways of connecting to something that we can just say is beyond the beyond. And so there is those cultural mechanisms for connecting to something broad and vast and boundless and intimate and infinite. And those are very often culturally based. It's also true that all of us, I think, in every culture, get stuck in and convoluted and tied up in knots with our more narrow or primitive or instinctual part of our nature. And every culture has different ways of dealing with that. In the West, we've been dealing with psychology. And I think psychology has a lot to offer in terms of mechanisms of how to untangle ourselves when we are caught in our instincts of survival or our primitive kind of crazy core that can get all tangled up. And psychology, in the West at least, has come up with a lot of different methods to help untangle that knot. And if we can then ground it with our, if we have a spiritual base, with something of a way to connect with something way beyond our blind or narrow egoistic perspective, that's great. And every culture has its own way of connecting to something beyond the narrow egoistic perspective. And every culture has got some way to work with ourselves or with our family or with our tribe to untangle when we get caught and entangled at the most narrow or primitive level. And so every culture's got methods to doing that. In the West, we use psychology for untangling, and we use spirituality for grounding and broadening our perspective. In different cultures, it'll go by different names.
Thank you, Nicole. Thank you, Rōshi. And if I could insert here just a couple of things that are not so much questions. Yoshin has kindly put in the chat a link to SDI Press where you can find Rōshi's book, and there's a code there too. So do note that. And I also wanted to mention, before we lose anybody here, Rōshi will be our guest again tomorrow. And we're experimenting with doing an evening program. So this will be 6 p.m. U.S. Eastern. No, I'm sorry, 8 p.m. U.S. Eastern time, and appropriately earlier on the West Coast, 5 p.m. I think on the West Coast, and 6 in my Mountain Time zone. Hoping to get those people who are working or taking care of kids during the day, and perhaps some of the Australians as well. So if you'd like to join again tomorrow, you're welcome to come back. And I'm guessing Rōshi's talk will have perhaps new layers or a different feel to it because it's a different day. So anyone else have a comment or a question? We've got time, so feel free. Yoshin, hi.
Sorry to be so bold. I have as I was listening to Nicole too, I couldn't help but it kind of resonate with what she was saying. I've noticed that in Western psychology, the dualism is really emphasized. individualism, egocentric, and then the other. And I studied Christianity as well. I'm ordained in the PCUSA. So to Christians, it's the other. We have to rely on the other, and then forget the self and rely on the other. So there's the dualism is really insisted there. In Buddhism, I think there is the big mind and then our small mind. So we have to tap into that big mind, I guess, which is Buddha nature. And yet we're trying to be non-dualistic. So not trying, our Buddha nature inherently is not dualistic, is what we've been taught. So I wonder if you can speak to that. And also I have another question. In that non-dualistic mind, the big mind, what does justice look like?
Okay.
Besides what you described.
Well, from a big mind perspective, we see everyone as closer to us than our own brother or sister, much closer. And as an extension of one mind or one body, and that everyone is a part of one mind and one body, including the environment. So justice from the big mind perspective is that we're all a part of one fabric, and we can't do without any part of our fabric. It's not whole without the whole fabric. I heard Bernie talk about, on very rare occasions, like if you have a gangrene hand, you might need to actually cut it off. If the infection has gotten so gangrene that it's going to infect the rest of the body, you might have to cut it off. But that's not our justice intention. Our intention is try to heal the hand. Every part of our body is connected and needed. And only at the very last resort would we want to try to cut something off. And I think that's justice, is that we are trying to hold everyone and see everyone as a part of one fabric and a part of one nature, and understand that we're all needed and that each one of us has a piece of the puzzle. You can't throw away parts of the jigsaw puzzle and expect to see the whole picture. You need every piece of the jigsaw puzzle, and that everyone and everything is a different piece of the jigsaw puzzle. You can't have the whole picture unless you have all the puzzle pieces. So eliminating puzzle pieces is where we start to get in trouble. Well, I don't like these these puzzle pieces because they're deformed in some way. We make that distinction, or they're the wrong color, or they're too complicated. So let's just discard these puzzle pieces. That's injustice. The justice is learning how to keep all the puzzle pieces so that we see the whole picture.
Can I add something? Because I really don't know why I asked this question. So somehow it popped up, and I knew it has something to do with Myoshin being there, but I really have no answer why. And I think now what comes to my mind that Buddhism and psychotherapy, at least in the Western world, it's a lot about healing. I mean, here in Austria, for example, we have like 95% psychotherapy and 5% spiritual practice. But I was thinking in terms of healing, then maybe there are other cultures that can have other supplements in a way. Let's just say, let's take Buddhism and dance, or Buddhism and something else. And in terms of awakening and healing, that this is a cultural thing, how, to put practices together to make an enhancement.
Well, I like that idea, Nicole, a lot, that we need a multidisciplinary way to mature, where you can bring together all kinds of elements, not just, say, psychology and Buddhism. How about Tai Chi or yoga or Qigong or dancing or drumming or kayaking, and we bring them all together, and that they each one of them becomes a different piece that helps us integrate and mature using many different modalities and channels, not just two. Georgia, you had a question. I see your hand up. And it's great to see you, and I love your paintings.
Good to see you after many years. So I have a question on a personal note. We were both at the Auschwitz retreat, I think, when you were at your first one, and I would like to hear from you about the impacts and how it has influenced your practice and your work, and on such a note.
You know, every one of the 5 bearing witness retreats that I've done with ZPI had a big enough impact that they're practically a whole chapter. Each one of them is a different chapter in the book. So they all had a big influence on me. And I don't want to repeat everything that's in the book on this one, but yes, that Auschwitz Birkenau retreat helped me see, you know, I understood that there were so many people that got off the sorting tracks and were sent to the gas chambers and how awful that was. I already had some comprehension of that. It was on the labor side, where the life expectancy was only 3 months if you didn't get sent to the gas chamber and you were sent to this hell realm of being on the labor camp side. Exactly just how sadistically cruel that part of existence became and could be. It was mind-blowing. And for a long time, I ended up reading several books about Dr. Mengele, because I could not get my head around a educated person torturing children in the way that he did, and, you know, infecting one twin child with a disease and then killing both twins in order to do autopsies. These kinds of craziness that we were exposed to on the labor side of Auschwitz-Birkenau, or people being just burned alive because they were starved to death, thrown out into the environment and starved to death because there wasn't enough room in the gas chambers. You know, this was just mind-boggling. And how could we get into such a corrupt place that so many people could be so cruel and sadistic to each other? And that's been my big koan that I continue to investigate.
Thank you, Georgia and Rōshi, and I love your artwork as well, Georgia. Sandro, I see you have your little electronic hand up too. If you have another question.
I have, but I forgot to raise hand. And I would like to ask you about the Barry Witness retreat, because I would like in the future to make some kind of this kind of retreat here in Brazil, in a place that we have like a concentration camps to in Ceará, in Nordeste northeast of Brazil, with people who are running out from the hungry, and 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 in some places, in some cities here, we have this kind of concentration camp too. I would like to make, and I used to I used to make interfaith movement, and the Catholic people used to make some every year make some event there in this place, and you have already participate, and if I understand right, conduct some bear witness retreat. So what you suggest for someone like me that never conduct a retreat like that, or participate in Rio, because I participate from the last Berknell online retreat, but not the real one.
Well, even having done 5 bearing witness retreats, I've never organized one myself. And I'm so grateful to ZPI for having all of this history of, more than 20 years of leading and organizing bearing witness retreats, and so thrilled that, they've done them in South Dakota here, and we're working towards doing one in the Deep South, and we, in the former Yugoslavia, they did one that I missed, and I'm so sorry to have missed it. I would love to see one in Cambodia. I would love to see one in Nanking, and I would love to see one in Brazil. And we're so fortunate to have the expertise of this organization that Bernie got started. And so I don't consider myself, even after being in 5 retreats, as being someone who knows how to organize it yet. But I do feel like I'm ready to help organize. And so grateful to ZPI for having this decades of experience on how to put this together. And I hope all of us going forward who are associated with ZPI, as the pandemic begins to lift and we can get back together again, if the vaccine gets distributed equitably enough around the world, that we can again resume with ZPI's expertise and long history, that we can all learn and participate. I don't consider myself an expert of any kind yet, and still a student of ZPI as an organization going forward.
Maybe it's appropriate if I just add a little texture here as far as what's going on. We're moving forward with our in-person bearing witness or retreat or plunge in Wyoming, the first or the second week in July, July 8th through 14. Registration opened up just the other day, and we immediately got maybe about a dozen people signing up. And so we are planning to be together with 5 native elders at the Medicine Wheel in the Bighorn Mountains, July 8th through 14. So if anyone is interested, I would highly encourage you to move quickly. Again, this notification just went out Thursday, and we had an instant reaction. Beyond that, in fact, in exactly 1 hour, an executive group is meeting to discuss Auschwitz for this year, and our desire and our intention are very much to be back in person in Poland. And normally the planning for the Auschwitz event begins most of a year in advance. We've been on hold for reasons that are obvious to everyone, but we're meeting today to really set ourselves a deadline, which will need to be in the next week or two, to call the question about Auschwitz. And I think we're probably going to do it. My sense is we're probably going to do it in person. And then Rōshi has referred to the virtual race plunge that we did back, I think, in February. And our intention from the beginning was to do that in person. We had been researching doing that in person for a number of years. And I think in 2022, we will be doing that in person. And that could, yeah, we haven't, we haven't put our planning group together. Rōshi, I hear you're interested in that, and expect a call from me. we need a good thinking group and a good working group to pull these things together. And Sandro, for you, maybe we can talk later offline. I know Sensei Koho has talked to me about starting an affiliate group in Brazil. As you know now, Chorin is on the board of directors, and so I think there's plenty of energy and an intention in Brazil to bring a group together. And I think a Brazil group could organize and execute an event there at some point. So maybe we can talk separate from this meeting. Does anyone else have a comment? Let's see. Anyone else have a comment or a question? I'm saving mine. I don't want to dominate here, but I do have something. Okay. Thank you, Motion. I will do that. Well, I don't see a hand. Am I missing anybody's hand? Yeah, there's a message from Rōshi in the chat if you want to see that.
And that is a link for, especially for my people who have trained with me in Bonn or Cole. If you want to be, or anyone on this call that wants to be part of the hive or room within ZPI associated with the Choboji Temple and what we're up to and what we're hoping to be up to, you can join our particular room subsection of ZPI, and we can all communicate together.
Thank you for that, Rōshi. Well, maybe I'll take the opportunity to pose my question, and there is a question in here, Rōshi, for you. I may feel my way along to get to it, and maybe it's more just looking for your comment on what I'll say. I really so much appreciate you talking about the intimate, somatic, psychological, personal dynamic of our practice, and how much work it is to create that expansion. And I think I saw you move your hands, and how quickly it snaps closed. And I really experienced that. And after decades of practice, the only thing that really has changed is time and space. Is that there's a little more time that it remains open, and it's a little more open. but the demons are always there, and they're more than always willing to come back and take over my life. So I'm giving a talk tonight, and this is a borrowed notion from Rōshi Barbara Wegmüller in Switzerland, and she referred to her personal sangha. And what she was talking about, and this is what I'm going to talk about tonight, what she was talking about is all of these self-images that almost they're not complete personalities, but they have partial personalities. I believe she said that she might even have named them. And it resonated so strongly with me that and I started writing them down for myself and giving them names and descriptions. And, there's the hurt little boy that sulks and goes away, I don't need your love. I'm going to go away by myself. Who is that guy? and these various selves that or aspects of my personality that come to bear at different times. And again, with practice, really the only thing that has much changed is I get to see them rather than them just taking me by the scruff of the neck and having their way. I get to, but the notion is that they're never going away.
Correct.
They're never going away, and I just need to, as Rōshi Barber said, set the table and sit down with them and make friends with them. And I'm just curious. There's kind of a question in there, but I didn't mean to pontificate. But if you have any reaction to that, I'd love to hear it.
Yeah, and externally, we don't want to cut anything away. We want all the puzzle pieces, and the same thing is true internally. And our own inner children become demons when they're not invited to the table. They become demons when they're not invited to the table. But if they're invited to the table, using your metaphor, then they become your inner children again. And we learn how to become the good parent, maybe even the parent we never had ourselves. And that's a lot of what maturity is learning how to invite these aspects that feel very demon-like, indeed can act very demon-esque, back to the table. And then it turns out that they're all inner aspects of our own inner children. They might be our teenager, they might be our 2-year-old, they might be some other age that has been somehow rejected and therefore becomes a demon in our eyes, and can act very demon-like. But when they're invited back to the table, then and we become the good parent by tapping what I call our inner sage, which is to say our big mind. When we're able from our big mind to invite everybody back to the table, then they transform to demons to inner children who need our care and attention too. So I have an inner child who really wants to have his chocolate, biscotti, and milk every evening. And so he gets it. Every evening I have my chocolate biscotti and milk, and I put it in my milk and I eat my chocolate biscotti. And that part of my inner child is no longer a demon, because he knows that every night he's going to have his biscotti and milk. So I've learned how to take care of I've learned better how to take care of my inner children. And so they're not so demonesque. And I find myself less trapped by my anger or my repulsion or my preferences, because I've brought these all to the table.
Thank you for that. That's beautiful. That's perfect.
Yoshin.
Yes, my heart is beating, so that means I need to speak. Somebody said that before. When I heard the notion of befriending inner children, that again kind of brought me to the Western thinking of dualism. From my understanding of Buddhist teachings, is to let go of the self, understand the self so you can forget yourself, is Dogen's teaching. And the Heart Sutra is the culmination of that. Ku is emptiness. Emptiness means Anatman, which means no self, non-self. So what is the difference between accepting all these inner children and labeling them and just keeping them and paying attention to them and finally letting go of them?
Oh, I love it, Yoshin. That's a wonderful point. And enlightenment, I think, is coming to this non-dualistic perspective. And it's a wonderful feeling, and it's a great truth, and it needs to be honored. and accepted. And so I'm a big fan of the Heart Sutra and of the non-dualistic big mind perspective. And sometimes, in order to have integration, every piece of the puzzle has to be accepted and integrated. And then the picture pops out. It's like the integrated non-dual picture pops out when all of the puzzle pieces are put into the frame or into the picture. So when I say, quote unquote, my inner children, that's like taking little pieces of the puzzle that make the big puzzle picture and bringing them to the table and getting them integrated. And then the big mind picture pops out in a much broader, more stable way. So I had the experience initially of having that big mind perspective, and I thought, well, my goodness, this is fantastic. And then discovered later, because I had that experience, of how many puzzle pieces were missing when I got back to my personal life. So then I spent many years collecting the different puzzle pieces that had been missing or abused or rejected, and bringing them back to the table. And then when I see it have that big mind perspective, it's much more stable with all the puzzle pieces there and in their place.
Very nice, thank you. We have a few more minutes if someone else has a question or a comment or an observation or even a random thought that doesn't make any sense whatsoever. Those are the most fun.
Sonia, you had a question or a comment?
Yes, it's very interesting, just your comment about bringing all the puzzle pieces together. I myself, as we all individually are on our on our in our pursuits, trying to bring our own individual puzzle pieces together. I find it interesting how at times it can be very disjointing for other people in my life, family members, my spouse, when I'm trying to open up to the multitude of puzzle pieces that exist within my individual life. And I find it interesting, and like my biggest challenge is trying to navigate the interpersonal relationships and those dynamics, while at the same time staying open to the multitude of puzzle pieces. And I don't know, it's interesting, like the friction that also comes up when in that process of trying to acknowledge Buddha nature. and most people at times don't want to deal with a lot of those things, or like if a lot of people don't want to deal with the conflict that they're maybe creating unnecessarily. And I'm curious if you might have any insights of like your own personal experiences bringing those puzzle pieces together, and while at the same time staying open to the people also in your life, if that makes sense.
Even within my own Sangha, just because I'm in a leadership position and I happen to be a white male with privilege, just by the very fact of my, I come from rather poor white trash background, but still, that's still got a lot of privilege. And here I am in a leadership position. Even maintaining peace of mind amongst our own Sangha, because there turns out to be hierarchical differences or little subset differences within the Sangha, and it can be totally crazy making. And all I can say is that it's a lifelong project to learn how to live with each other and really live up to our ideals that are inside the Four Noble Truths, the Eightfold Paths, and the Bodhisattva vows. Collectively, we're all still learning, and it's not easy. We're let's face it, we're all these lumps of stardust that are seamless with the rest of the universe, and yet, as lumps of stardust, we are very complex and easily confused and conflicted and tied up in knots. That's just the truth of it. It comes with our genius. It also comes with our ability to be so easily conflicted, confused, and tied up in knots. And then you get two or more of us together, and yes, two or more of us together can open up to the broad, non-dualistic, peace of mind, loving, intimate Buddha nature. But you get two or more of us together, and we can, since we're all so complex anyway, we can get so entangled together so quickly, it's unbelievable. So, you know, it's a great koan how to sustain and ground our non-dualistic big mind perspective while being together. I'm not saying it's easy. It's not. Each one of us is such a complex little lump of stardust, and bring two or more of us together, and you exponentially magnify the complexity. When it works, it's just absolutely wonderful and incredible and magical. And when it doesn't, it can become so convoluted and cruel and sadistic. It's just unbelievable. And frankly, the book is all about that, trying to explore those very questions. And you know, if any of us thinks that we've arrived, we're really fooling ourselves.
Endless practice, right?
Yep.
I've certainly tripped and stumbled along the way. And one of the things that I learned relatively early was that awakening experiences are not nearly enough to equate to maturity. I had some very powerful early awakenings, and I'm very grateful for them. And I would say to anyone not to be missed. But they certainly opened the door to the path, but they didn't unscramble all the entanglements that we collect through development and adolescence and young adulthood. It took a lot more to untangle all of that than some even substantial awakening or breakthrough. Even many breakthroughs are not enough to unscramble the complexity of the human condition and the entanglements that we collect along the way in the course of pretty normal development, which can be aggravated by any history of abuse or trauma or abandonment of some sort or disaster of some sort. Then the entanglements that we pick up along the way, developmental entanglements that we pick up along the way, are going to be magnified. And awakening is not nearly enough to unscramble it all, in my opinion, and in my experience. So this is a book that tries to say, well, what is needed if awakening isn't enough and a strong practice isn't enough to come into a maturity that is really well grounded and can meet the trials and tribulations and the stormy weather of being a human being in these times, in any time, and be a catalyst as a kind of grounded catalyst for positive change or evolution of the human spirit towards more kindness and care for each other and the planet. I've been very fortunate to have mentors and guides along the way that don't provide the answers, but have helped point the way, right? And maybe even left a few cairns along the path so that I knew where to explore. It certainly took much more than Zen training. I mean, I've been training at Zen, doing, let's say, a daily meditation practice since 1975. That's a long time, but it took a lot more than Zen training and my association with very complex and flawed teachers to unscramble myself, let alone feel as though I was being a productive catalyst and help to others. So it's about that journey. And I think that's all of our journey, is how do we integrate and become more whole and therefore more grounded and more consistently in Buddhism, it's Hote, the holy fool who is always ready to lend a helping hand and is not part of the rat race to have enough and a little more, and is a catalyst, even perhaps unseen, for caring for society and the planet as a whole. We often say that we're part of one body and one mind, and I believe that completely. But so often we're stuck in our own narrow egoistic perspective, and our awakening helps us branch out of our narrow egoistic perspective. And then I think we've all experienced that even with awakening, it snaps back and over time. And we can do, depending on how narrow that perspective is, we can end up becoming so tied up in knots that we trip over ourselves and maybe over each other, and can even cause great harm. How can we be so awful to ourselves? I mean, all you have to do is open the paper and see how much in the human condition we're still terrible as a whole in caring for each other, let alone the planet. And how is it that, and ZPI is famous for exploring this, investigating with the three tenets, entering the unknown of, and then bearing witness to just how awful the human condition can be. I've been on 5 bearing witness retreats, and I cover each one of them in the book because they were so important in my investigation of how can we be so messed up that, genocides all over the world continue. And I began in Auschwitz-Birkenau and did 3 retreats there with Bernie, and 1 in South Dakota, and one in Rwanda, and I missed the one in the old Yugoslavia in the Baltics, and I wish I had been able to be there. But every place I've gone, and I'd love to, someday we could have one in Nanking or Cambodia or many other places that we could probably name, where there have been these awful confluences where the human condition has gotten so convoluted that it creates the greatest possible sadism towards each other. How can that be? And what can we do as individuals and collectively by entering the unknown together? What insights can come up that can help us personally and collectively mature as individuals and as a species? And really, this is a book of one journey about exploring those questions. So that's what the book is about. It's about 65 years of pretty much from the very beginning, wondering what is this after all, and what's it all about, and how can it work a little better, and what's going to help with that, and is there anything that we can do, knowing about ourselves and investigating ourselves, that can help us personally and collectively, not be quite so entangled personally or collectively, that we cause great harm, and that we end up being more kind to each other as we go forward. And without that level of maturity and kindness, I mean, we're doomed as a species. I don't know. I've often said that I don't know that our species is going to survive its own adolescence. We've been around a couple 100,000 years as humans, and I think we're just beginning our adolescence. Many adolescents don't make it through adolescence. We'll see. I'd like to be a part of, from my own investigation and my own investigation with others, be a part of us surviving our adolescence and being a better brother and sister to our fellow species and to our Mother Earth. And that's what the book is about. So I'll say all of that. I hope that if you haven't gotten it already, that you take a look at it and maybe buy it and join me in this investigation and movement. I'm sure everybody on this channel is already doing that, and it's great. And somehow by sharing with each other our journeys, I think we can, with organizations like ZPI, and here locally in Seattle, we have a wonderful organization called the Faith Action Network, which is an inter-religious council that has been doing great lobbying at the state and local level to make small but significant improvements each year at the local and state level. And I feel so grateful to be a part of what's called, I sit on the Interfaith Leadership Council. We don't do a lot except get together and then work with our various synagogues and mosques and Sikh temples and Buddhist temples and Christian churches and Catholic churches and all work together to think about, looking at the bigger picture from this perspective rather than this perspective. How can we work together and treat ourselves and our environment better? And happily, right here in this little corner of the Pacific Northwest, I think that's happening. Will it be fast enough to allow us to turn things around or at least survive our adolescence as a species? I don't know, we'll find out. But I feel very committed to trying. And so that's, again, what the book is about, is how can we do that together? And exploring one exploration of my own 65 years of journey around these kind of questions and looking at that. So I'm going to shut up now and see if there are questions and comments. I do want to say that if you go to, it's printed by a small press called Spiritual Director International Press. You can look it up on Amazon, see who the publisher is. Go to the publisher, and then if you use my name, Genjō, Genjo, 1250, you get $12.50 off the price, which makes it a reasonable price rather than an exorbitant price. So if you haven't gotten it, I suggest doing it that way.
Thank you, Rōshi. I just put that in the chat for everybody so you can see that. Let me go back here so I can see everybody again. This is where we all get to participate. So I can see everyone, so we don't need to use the electronic hand. Um, and I really encourage anyone to step forward with a question or a comment or an observation or sharing something that relates to this topic, and just go ahead and wave your hand and unmute yourself, and feel free to step out.
Jacqueline.
Hi, thank you so much. I'm really interested in reading your book. It's definitely the next step on my journey. So I was just watching the news, and when I watch the news lately, I just start crying. It's so much, and I'm not there's not a barrier from feeling the George Floyd, the what's going on, in everywhere, all over. And I've been looking at a distance at the bearing witness options of Auschwitz and other places like that. And I'm wondering if you could talk about how you don't become overwhelmed by grief when you're bearing witness.
Well, I don't know how you can't become overwhelmed by grief when you're bearing witness. And that's okay. You know, I broke down many times in every single bearing witness retreat. In fact, I can feel tears coming out right now thinking about it. Grief is a part of it. It's a part of maturing, is to be able to empathetically feel without being destroyed. And learning, part of maturity is learning how not to be destroyed by grief, but to have grief and allow it to, in the witnessing of that grief, your own grief, the collective grief, to enter again that no knowing and wait in the midst of the grief while the grief kind of drains a bit anyway, to wait for some insights or some inspiration about how to proceed, little things on how to proceed. So for example, for the last year, we've had in the Zendo, we have a habit of bowing into the meditation hall and then bowing to a statue of Kuan Yin, Kannon. And underneath that statue, we've had a picture of George Floyd. So everyone coming into the meditation hall all year has bowed into the hall and then bowed to this picture of George Floyd, representing much more than just George Floyd, of course. And as a community, it inspired us to look more closely at white privilege and white fragility and systemic racism and have book groups around that subject matter. And that was some of the inspiration that came from the grief around that tragedy. Another thing is that it by allowing ourselves to have the grief, I think it not only allows us to grieve personally, but since we're all connected, as Carl Jung would say, with the collective unconscious, or we would say in Buddhism, with the one body and one mind, when we are strong enough and big enough and mature enough to grieve, we end up grieving for the whole body politic, for the whole body. And somebody's got to grieve. Mm-hmm. Somebody's got to be mature enough to grieve. And when we can do it, if we're mature enough to let that grief come and to drain a little bit of it, then, each time I went to Auschwitz-Birkenau, it felt as though there's so much pain and grief in that location that even after 20 years of doing bearing witness retreats with hundreds of people each time coming from around the world, we're still just barely getting off some of the grief. But it truly felt as though the whole place was a little lighter.
Mhm.
It's going to take a lot more retreats
Mhm.
to burn off all the grief of that one location,
Mm.
But when people get together and do it, it really, we walk away feeling, oh, how awful it is and how much more there is to be done, but it's a little bit lighter.
Yeah. Thank you. What option do we have?
You know, I did a meditation retreat in New York shortly after, as soon as you could fly, which was, you know, everything was shut down after 9/11. And the Twin Towers had come down and all the trauma of that. And it felt as though sitting in a Zendo in New York, that we were breathing some of the breaths that needed to be breathed for those who had to jump out of the window or were crushed. And that we could breathe some of the breaths of the families and of the people who've died and the families who are grieving. We could participate in it directly.
Yeah.
Thank you for your question, Jacqueline. That was wonderful. And Rōshi, for your answer. Anyone else have something to, a question or a comment or a thought, a feeling? Hi, Choa. Thanks.
Hello. Hello, Roshi. Thank you for joining us and your efforts. I'm really struck or resonating when you talk about awakening is not enough. And I've been really aware of just like how open and fused American modern Zen really has become. Like the amount that psychotherapy and somatic experience and Ken Wilber, neuroscience and yoga and just all these different traditions, all these different sciences, all these different practices that are really seeping into Buddhist communities in America. And I just wonder if you could speak to like the positive parts about that, how those are supplementing awakening, because you said awakening is not enough, and maybe some of the negative parts, how it's kind of maybe diluting the Dharma, if it is at all, or if it's somehow getting in the way of some kind of, adding too many ideas to the Dharma or not. Just curious your thoughts on that.
Yeah. When I think of something that doesn't have to be Zen practice, but there are practices that help us expand our sense of self or mind, that bring us out of our narrow egoistic perspective and really pop us out into a much broader, more communal perspective, universal perspective, which is absolutely fabulous and wonderful. But I don't know that that spaciousness is enough to untangle our inner core of wounds and traumas and primitive instincts of survival, which can be very dominant. And so other practices such as, I think the martial arts are one way to help us pass through our fear, face our fear, and pass through our fear. Something like Aikido or Tai Chi or Qigong. And psychology also can help us pass through our fear by helping untangle our inner entanglements. So the spaciousness, here's my inner entanglements. And in the beginning, they're like this. And with spaciousness, okay, now they're like this. I can see them much better. They're not entirely blocking my view, but they're still just as entangled as ever. Now, the spaciousness may help loosen it up a little bit, but I may need several other modalities to unscramble that and to untangle that. So I'm very grateful that psychology and seeing an analyst for 3 years really helped me. The spaciousness helped me see it and not be so dominated by it. But the analyst helped me untangle it. I was very grateful for that modality. And doing some martial arts helped me face my own inner fears. I did some Aikido for a while, and that helped untangle it because I wasn't so frightened, because I learned how to face my fears, some of my fears on the mat, some of my fears of physical abuse that I had in my past. And so these different modalities really, when applied to this inner entanglements, really helped. And the spaciousness that I got from the Zen practice wasn't enough. I've also seen in my teachers, and I go into this in some detail, that the spaciousness of awakening can be used as a kind of spiritual bypass, that you rely on that spaciousness to not do this work of untangling our inner entanglements. And that will come back to haunt the teachers, and come back to haunt the sanghas, come back to haunt yourself if you're not working on these inner entanglements. So maturity is learning how to use the spaciousness and the modalities of practice and other modalities to untangle the karmic knots that we've collected along our way, both personally and some that have been handed off generationally, and that we're carrying, the knots that we've collected personally and the knots that we've collected generationally. And if we can apply our spaciousness along with practice modalities that are maybe within Zen and outside of Zen, to unscrambling this, that's what leads to maturity. There's a lot of tied up energy in this knot, and it can be very destructive if not addressed. But if untangled, all this entangled energy comes back out to be served as part of your own maturity. And it untangles, when you untangle that knot in your personal karmic history, you're also doing a part of relieving the generational madness that may often is handed off to us. So I think altogether it's an advantage. However, your other question is, does it mean that we're diluting? It's possible that we're diluting awakening. I don't want to do that either. There's a very important part about practices that are strong enough to bring us to the spaciousness where we can do the work. And I do worry that sometimes when there are too many elements, you're getting a little bit of everything and it's just becoming mediocre in some way. And so I like different modalities that are each one very strong. And then you bring them together without diluting them or trying to make them all fit. And then you end up with something that's a mediocre conglomerate. Instead, no, let me get all that I can out of this modality and go really strong with that. That serves me very well. And this other modality, maybe like a martial art or maybe like psychoanalysis, I'll go very strong in that modality, and that modality will serve a certain part. This modality will serve a certain part. But if I try to put them all together at once, I may be just ending up with a mediocre mush.
Thanks for that, Rōshi. And Jeff, I saw a chat from you. Ah, okay. So you're going to have to step off. Thanks for being here a little bit, Jeff. It's good to see you.
Thanks for being here, Jeff.
Someone else have a comment or a question? I always keep a couple in my sock in case we get to a lull. So, Jerry, hi, thanks. Bail me out.
No, I'm dying to hear what's in your sock, but in the meantime, Rōshi, I appreciated your thought that we're nearing the end of our adolescence as a species. I don't want to take the metaphor far, but being a teenager species doesn't sound much better. The question I have about it is, where do you see that maturity is kicking in? And because I see a lot more efficient use of technology to do bad things. I don't know where you're kind of developing that optimism. I really wish I could develop that for myself.
I think we're more towards the beginning or middle of our adolescence, not coming out of the end of it. And it's a very dangerous time for our species, because in my view, we're just at the start of our adolescence, or the middle of our adolescence at best. I don't think we're at the end of it. And I think there's lots of evidence that shows just how troubling that is. So I am an optimist that many teenagers survive. And many people do grow up out of their adolescence. And there are times when you don't. And the planet is also impermanent, but it's got at least another good billion years. We've only been around 200,000 years. If we really mess it up and take a bunch of species with us and are become and entirely failed, I trust the planet has got plenty of time to throw up another experiment. So I have that optimism, and I have the optimism still that indeed, working together individually and together, that we can help our species along to survive and grow out of our adolescence collectively. But I think, I don't want to be depressing here, but I think that there are many thousands of years yet to go where it's going to be a struggle.
Thank you. I misunderstood your earlier comments. Thank you for clarifying.
So what part can we do, taking the very long view? I have a very short life, but if I have a very long view, what can I do today that will reduce the generational madness, bring a little bit more peace and kindness from this generation to the next?
Thanks, Jerry. Thanks, Rōshi. Hi, Daichi.
Hello. Good to be here. Genjō, Jacqueline asked a little earlier, I've been sitting with this, she asked a great question about grieving and, how to, I've been feeling this too. And I think all of us here, you turn on the TV or read the newspaper, and I'm just overwhelmed with something, and it's just hard to deal with every day. But then, as I ponder that, you mentioned that we're, barely in our adolescence as a species. For much of our history, we lived in a clan, and we only had to worry about the clan on the other side of the hill, maybe. And now we hear daily about things that are happening across the globe, and how am I supposed to embrace that, and how am I supposed to process that? And there's a lot of grieving involved. I agree with Jacqueline, and how we grieve and we don't grieve. We need to really pivot into that in a big way. So my question, Genjō, to you, your answer said, you said in your answer that grieving takes a hell of a lot of maturity. And I'd like you to tease that out a little bit, because I think anybody can grieve on any level. So I don't quite understand that comment. Maybe you can tease it out a little bit more for me.
You bet. Daichi is, by the way, everyone, a member of our local temple, a member of Choboji here in Seattle. And he just got the book yesterday. All right. So, yes, anyone can grieve. And so it doesn't take maturity to grieve. It takes maturity to grieve and release rather than recycle and get stuck. Grief can either recycle and just go around and around, and that's not very mature grieving. And it's just as awful the next day as it is the first day. Or grief can be awful, all right, but it drains a little bit each time going around. And that's what happens, well, in my view, in these plunges and bearing witness retreats, is that personally and collectively, we learn how to release a little bit of it, to drain a little bit of it. And that takes, frankly, a great deal of courage and maturity and dedication and determination to hang in there. Another thing I'm really grateful about the bearing witness retreats or plunges is that they, you don't have your head in the sand. You'd go to one of these things. It's you are going into it in a deep way, and you're keeping your eyes wide open, and the tears are definitely flowing. And it's like, you want to learn how to deal with all the terrible news that we're getting around the world? Go sit in Auschwitz a few times. You learn how to be in the worst of the human condition. And then, I'm not saying that reading the news is like a knife through warm butter, but you learn how to handle it better because you've been next to the worst of it. Go sit, as we did on, a grave of 50,000 people in Rwanda who died just 20 years ago, everybody getting machete. Talk about gruesome. Or go sit in the killing fields in Cambodia and really sit there. If we can immerse ourselves in the worst of it and learn how to grieve and release, then indeed we can be in our everyday awful world and not be so traumatized. Jacqueline again.
You say grieve and release. Could you say more about the release part of it?
Well, I don't know how to put it into words more than what I've already said in a way. When I was in New York and it was after 9/11, it just felt as though we were breathing some of the breaths or some of the grief that those sudden deaths didn't have time for. And it felt as though collectively, as part of one body and one mind, that we had the spaciousness sitting in that sesshin to do some of that collective grief and letting it out and letting it be felt and feeling it for the whole collective. And when I sat in Auschwitz, it felt as though, there's so much pent up grief there, so much pent up grief, that even 100 people sitting for 5 days could still get at a little bit of it, but we could get at a little bit of it. That was the amazing thing. We could get at a little bit of it. And in South Dakota, sitting in the middle of not sort of internal island, feeling the grief of the last, 100+ years of genocide within our own continent, of the first peoples, and to hear the stories and feel it with people who it's inside of their generational memory, what's going on today and what's going on in the past, and feel it with them and have them feel us feel it. Help them release a little more, helped us release a little bit more, and actually come up with some insights or some determination on how to proceed. So we come back from the Bearing Witness retreats in South Dakota, and a few of us here at Choboji who went to that retreat came back inspired to do something with our local tribe, who still don't have federal recognition. We became part of something called Real Rent, where we are, even though the federal government isn't doing any support for the tribe because it's not federally recognized, and they say, but we're still here, we were never put on a reservation. And the government says, well, you weren't put on a reservation, so can't be federally recognized. And we say, no, the Duwamish say, no, this is the land of the Duwamish, we never left. All of their longhouses were burned down. They collected enough money to build one. And now there are more than way over 4,000 people who are paying a little bit of rent every month. I am personally, the temple is as a temple to the tribe. It's like, I'm not saying that wouldn't have happened if I hadn't gone to the South Dakota Bearing Witness retreat, but I came back motivated to be a part of that.
So there's two things I'm hearing. One is the importance of community in the grieving process, as opposed to me sitting in front of the TV crying. And the other thing is that opening that happens for action after bearing witness.
Exactly. And collect it, when two or more are gathered, it can get more complicated. There's no question about that, but it can also lead to the ability to be stronger together, to actually grieve and release rather than grieve and recycle.
Yeah.
Zenki?
Hey, Genjō and everybody, thank you so much for the presentation and the writing of that book. When you were talking, when you were giving the original presentation, I started to feel conflicted. And I'm sitting here going, why am I feeling so conflicted? And it's about where you say awakening is not enough. So as a long-term Zen practitioner, to hear that comment when, all the ancients, say, awaken, 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 that's the deal. And awakening is not enough. That kind of sent me back a little bit. And I was thinking, well, does he mean, when you get to the top of the mountain, you have to come back down? And then, is that what you're talking about, doing the stuff down here that needs to be attended to? Or, is an awakening first and then the other stuff follows? Or I got very confused with awakening is not enough.
Yeah, part of it is coming back down off the mountain. But there's another part of it, which is doing the inner work to clean up the karmic baggage that we all collect personally and carry generationally. And Zen doesn't talk a lot about that. I'm not saying it's not there. For example, Genpo Rōshi, who was the abbot at Rutakuji in Japan, when Japan surrendered, and talked to the emperor and said, you know, you really do need to surrender, and that's okay. And Genpo Rōshi said that to the emperor, and he was abbot at that time of Rutakuji in Mishima in Japan. He also said that the real work of Zen, he would say, you know, enlightenment's guaranteed. It's not that hard to come by. And I say this repeatedly in the book. But the real work, Genpo Rōshi said, the real work of Zen, this is also in the book, is what he called, the Japanese word is shukuko. And I define it as burning off the stuck karmic dung that we all carry. And that's the real work of Zen. And we forget that. Or the real work of maturity is to have sufficient awakening and practice or other modalities that allow us to get to the place where we can burn off our karmic knots that we hold personally and collectively. So yes, awakening is not enough. It's the start of being able to do this other work. And I've had significant teachers who, even if they knew that, didn't do the work. And the drama and tragedy that happened when that work didn't get done.
Thanks, Enki. And I'm going to call on Sean here, but I want to make sure I welcome Carolyn and Mary. Good to see you. Thank you for joining, and feel free to join the discussion too. You're welcome to do so. Sean, go ahead. You're unmuted.
Hi, hello all, and hello Genjō. Thank you very much for this time. I sat with Genjō for a couple of years in Seattle and recently moved to Sedona, and I had a couple of...
Nice to see you again.
Thank you. I had a couple of comments and a question about the structure you provide. So Genjō was my first practice outside of being raised a Roman Catholic to actually put something into my life that would be, of a physical nature rather than just studying books and trying to make my way. And I was first attracted to Genjō because of his Dharma talks that he wonderfully recorded and is a national treasure in my opinion, because it validated a lot of the things that I had developed along the way and from various teachers, but also just kind of really blew the doors off of so many things about me, so many, minor kenshas, if you will, just in just his words and his manner of speaking. So it was a true, I'm very grateful to have been able to come and sit with him and in all the songs. And having sat at a couple of other places, just a few, Spokane and San Francisco Zen Center and Albuquerque Zen Center and whatnot, and being able to provide just a little bit of contrast to what Genjō has put together, my gratitude just really deepened over the structure and tradition that is represented at Choboji. And I was wondering if you could give some comment on what I know what benefit that brought to me. It was an amazing structure around a really, really, really rapidly, wildly running monkey mind. And by having everything prescribed from the moment you arrive to the moment you leave, created that space to allow that opening up, just tremendous expansion. And having been at other places that didn't have that, I noticed that expansion effect wasn't as great. And so one of the things I sorely miss about the Seattle area now is being able to come and sit there for so many hosts of wonderful reasons, but that one specifically, because that's what I'm talking about here. And so my question relates to what do you see kind of that, how does that carry on, or how do we market that, I guess is the right term. There's a lot of Zen people, and I've read Cypress in the Garden, and these other the generations that have come before and are coming after you are going their own ways, and there isn't a centralized body anymore. And so that structure, for all its good and bad, does provide that the framework for which you can create that expansiveness. And I fear that in future generations we'll have lost that unless we do something about it. So I was wondering if you could comment about that.
Yeah, it's partly my fear too, that that what we call Zen, the many facets of it, will be so diluted that it's not nearly as powerful at providing a vehicle for awakening. And the awakenings will therefore not be as broad or complete or deep or something like that. And that there'll be a big disadvantage to that. One of the things that the book goes through is the 10 Zen Ox pictures, which I think gives a great overview of the developmental journey from a Zen perspective in terms of awakening. And I don't think it's linear. I think it's circular, or even more like a spiral. The 10 Zen Ox pictures is not something that you go from point A to point E or something, and you've covered it. No, it's something that you go around, and then you go around again, and you see it a little deeper, and you go around again, and you see it a little deeper. But I do worry that different centers aren't strong enough even to get around the circle once. And I do think that would be problematic if that got lost. But I don't think it's going to get lost. I think there are some groups that will hold a frame. I'm not saying the frame, but a frame that's strong enough to help everyone visit all 10 Zen pictures repeatedly, and then make use of having gone around the circle in a way to burn off the karmic baggage that we carry, or to at least begin that work of burning off our karmic baggage, personal and collectively, so that we can be better citizens, world citizens, in caring for each other and our planet. And is Zen the only way to do that? No. Does Zen really has it offered, in my view, a very structured way to visit the 10 Zen Ox pictures or what they represent? Yeah, I do. And it would be really sad if that got lost somewhere along the line, but I don't believe that will. Even if it's not quote unquote Zen, I don't think you can keep the Dharma down. It will pop up in some way, and someone will be propagating a method that helps practitioners be in a strong enough, determined enough environment to be exposed to what the Zen Ox pictures point at. And that will be very useful. But again, even that, repeatedly getting exposed to the 10 Zen Ox pictures, in my view, is not enough. Genpo Rōshi taught me, and I never met the man, but this idea of shukugo, and that the real work of practice and training, wherever it comes from whatever tradition, has to have enough tools to get around to burning off the karmic baggage we carry. And without that, we'll never get past our personal adolescence as a human being, even if we're old adults, because I've certainly seen that in some of my teachers. They really went around the 10 Zen Oxes pictures just fine and could point others to how to do it, but they never used it to do the inner work to grow up out of their own adolescence. And that became terrible. So somehow if we can combine modalities, or be rich enough in grounding of our Zen practice so that this Genpo Roshi's burning off Shikugo to bring us out of our own adolescence and bring us collectively out of our species adolescence is what is desperately needed.
Thank you very much for that. The spiral concept that you said was, yeah, just another wonderful example of what I've heard you say in the past about the practice is it. Like, it's never ending. You never get through the practice because there's always more to burn off. There's, perfection is never arrived at. So it's just a continual process. And I keep coming back to the Zen phrase, 7 times piercing, 8 times breaking through. There's something about just moving and cogitating that generates a field around you that blights your view, that you have to then have a daily practice of some kind to open that back up, to keep that space, that spaciousness. Otherwise, you're never going to be as productive as you could be.
One of the beautiful things that Zen training taught me repeatedly, and that all of my teachers, as flawed as they were, taught me, was that always say not yet, and always understand that wherever you are, you're just beginning.
Anyone else have something here? I'm going to go ahead and jump in with one of mine, if I could, Rōshi.
What's in that sock?
What's in that sock? Earlier, you had mentioned, you made a reference to including everyone and everything, or words to that effect. And and I do want to. What I really want to do is ask you to expand on that a little bit. We run up, Zen Peacemakers, we run up against, and I've been an activist since I grew up in Washington State, and, SDS in Seattle way back when. And we run up against people or organizations who really expect us and need us to take a position. And our position, the bearing witness position, and I don't want to make a speech here, but the bearing witness position is really non-positional, if you will. It really includes everyone. And I won't run through a bunch of examples, but there are numerous examples. We have one tomorrow. We're doing an event. We have like 77 people signed up to hear a couple of our members from Tel Aviv talk about Palestine and Israel and what's going on. So there's a lot of interest in this topic, but we've gotten more than a few nasty grams from people because our language was not positional enough. We weren't enough condemning this or that. And that our 2 presenters lived in Tel Aviv, so in the mind of the critic, that clearly meant that they had this position and they were on one side of this issue or the other. So I'm interested just to hear you expand a bit on that notion of what Bernie was so clear about was, and that's how Auschwitz started, right? There were descendants of Nazi soldiers and SS, and along with survivors and victims and so forth. So, and that was the soup, that was the stew that Bernie always wanted to create. So if there's a question there, I'd love to hear you expand on that a little bit.
I think it's, what do we do with such a polarized world? And it's becoming, frankly, more polarized than less polarized at this moment. And that's why I think Zen Peacemakers it's critical that we follow Bernie's example and position and learn and relearn and relearn how to understand that we're not just understand, but feel ourselves as one body and one mind, even with very, very, very different opinions. And where are the what are the common, for example, what are the common needs? What are the common sorrows? What are the common motivators? When I was at Auschwitz, one of the things I could get inside the victims relatively easy. I could even get inside some of the sadistic nature of some of the kind of capos of the who were also abused themselves. I could get inside even some of the Nazis who were, you know, they got so shut down it became like a job exterminating rats. You know, they were exterminators. I could get inside that. As awful as that sounds, what I had real trouble with, and lots of trouble with lots of things, but was like the Commandant. I couldn't get inside the Commandant. I couldn't get inside Dr. Mengele. It was like, wow. I couldn't get inside some of the guards that were deliberately being sadistic as they could possibly be. That was hard to imagine. How is this me? I want to say that's not me. I am not Dr. Mengele. I am not the sadistic guard. I am not the commandant. And yet, that's exactly what Bernie challenged us to look at. How am I the commandant? How am I the sadistic guard? How am I Dr. Mengele? And to go in and investigate beyond my, no, that's not me. And to come to terms with, I am Dr. Mengele. I am the commandant. I am the sadistic guard, and not just the victim. And only by going to places like that, I am the Junto and I am the Tutsi. I am both sides of this equation. And I wrote a paper where, as soon as Donald Trump got elected, I wrote a paper that's not in the book. It was in the first draft of the book. It got cut in by this, but it's titled, I Am Donald Trump. I needed to write that as soon as he got elected. And how is it that you know, I also had to figure out, how am I Edo Shimano, who could point me to the vastest, broadest horizon and could teach me about his Dharma grandfather, who talked about burning off shakugo, karmic baggage. And I knew I had a lot of karmic baggage to burn off, and then watch how he didn't do his own work. How could that live inside the same person and face that? And, you know, how am I? And when have I been Edo Shimano? You know, it's like, ouch, 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 ouch. I don't want that to be me. And yet that's the beauty, I think, of Zen Peacemakers and Bernie's vision, is to look inside and say, get past that's not me, and to sit with it. And what does that mean? And that brings me to a place where I can be more at peace in the midst of this polarity. And I know that when I'm kind of hated by both sides, I must be doing something right.
There's another recent example. We had I think a couple of people here are in our morning meditation group, and I might have shared this story, but we had a mass shooting here in Boulder, Colorado, not that long ago, and there were 10 victims. And it was on Monday, and I quickly organized about 6 or 7 Zen centers locally to do a memorial in Central Park. And again, there were 10 victims, but my idea was that throughout the course of the meditation, we'd ring the bell 11 times to include the perpetrator. And there was some fairly substantial pushback from a few people that just and I respect this, because maybe for everybody it was a little too soon and it's just a little too raw. But at some point you have to be able to ring the bell 11 times. And
we had a mass killing in a house not far from the Zendo. In fact, we were sitting a sesshin when we heard the shots and we heard the sirens come. And then during, I think it was either during sesshin or shortly after sesshin, we walked over as a temple to be part of a vigil to mourn the people who had died inside this house. And we had a reading off of the names, and I couldn't not also read off the name of the person who had done the shooting and had killed themselves. And there was, again, some pushback from that. But hopefully the way that I presented it, made space for, this is a tragedy all the way around. There's no part of this that isn't a tragedy.
we have a little bit more time. If someone else has a question or a comment or an observation, thought to share, a heart to share. Jacqueline, I'm going to have you hold for a second. I see Mark, and Mark hasn't had a chance yet. So Mark, go ahead, and we'll come back to you, Jacqueline, if we can. Mark, you'll need to unmute.
It looks like he's trying.
There
you go.
It took. I'm on my phone, and I don't know how to do things on my phone like I do on the computer. Continuing with the idea of the lessons of Auschwitz and of the bearing witness retreats, I've been thinking a lot recently that I'm 65 and I've learned more about myself and about people and the world in the last 5 years or so than I have in the previous 60. And that in many ways, Donald Trump has wound up being my greatest teacher. I feel like Jeff and I have known each other for many years, but we've never met, and we've only known each other online for 1 year. But I'm a very small person. And when I was a child in school, I was bullied quite a bit. And I kind of grew up with an attitude of being the avenger and of fighting bullies and also protecting the broken part inside of myself. And but I discovered at a certain point that when you're fighting bullies all the time, when that's where your energy is going, it's really easy to cross the line and become a bully. And I found that where I live, it's all Trump people. Everybody is pro-Trump in this part of Virginia. And sometimes I would be on my high horse and kind of attacking someone who really didn't get it. And I could see that I could see the hurt in their eyes by what I was saying. And in that moment, I had crossed that line and I had become a bully. I think that's a big part of maturity, maybe, is learning, picking up on those lessons.
Yeah, my brother, now deceased, was a Trump supporter. My aunt, who voted for Hillary the first time around, voted for Trump the second time around. my mother, who also recently passed a few years ago, voted for Trump the first time around, and then she died. But before she died, she said, "Oh my God, this was the last president I voted for." And my aunt was, in a way, it was so interesting. You could feel her prejudice and fear about her own senator in California. That's why she had to vote for Trump. And she could feel my disappointment, but hopefully she didn't feel any judgment from me. And my mother could feel my disappointment, but I tried to shield her from any judgment. And my brother and I could talk about what I respected in him and his talents and skills, and he could talk about what he respected in me, and we just did not talk politics. We learned we could not be in relationship if we talked politics. And so that's, I think, how we can maybe do it in terms of not becoming a bully and not surrendering our opinions. Not being a bully, but not surrendering our opinions either. I have very strong opinions and I claim them, but as Bernie would say, it's just my opinion, man.
Mark, thank you for that. That was really transparent and honest share. I appreciate that. We've got just a few more minutes here, and I also appreciate we have some East Coasters here, and it's getting on into the evening. So, anyone else have something else you'd like to? Jacqueline, do you want to jump in with yours, and maybe if it's brief?
I just wanted to express gratitude for ZPI, and for offering a space where we can be everything and everybody, and where we can honor the suffering without putting good or bad on the action. So I'm just really moved right now by that, what's being offered here. That's all I had to say.
Thanks, Jacqueline. Anyone else here before we wrap up? This has been good. Thank you, everyone, for contributing and being and presencing here with us. I'm gonna, as we wrap, I'm gonna do something that Genjō Rōshi probably doesn't have happen very often. I'm gonna quote him back to himself. We were talking yesterday, and Mark and Linda heard me say this morning in the ZPI morning zazen that we have weekdays. I gave a talk last night on the various self-images that you discover over time, and a friend of mine used the term personal sangha, and I've identified and named about 12 of them, and they're quite a motley crew. It's a real clown show, and sometimes and the point of the talk really was that with practice they don't go away. They're here for good. But that I get a little distance. I get a little bit of time before they grab me by the scruff of the neck, and I get the choice in that time, in that space. I get to choose how I'm going to react rather than reacting like a spoiled child, which is one of those. Anyway, I mentioned this to Rōshi, and I referred to them as demons. And Rōshi, I gave you full credit for this. I included you in my talk last night, and what you said was, our own inner children only become demons when they are not invited to the table. I wrote it down verbatim. When they're not invited to the table. When we are good parents and we welcome them, they cease being demons and they show up as children simply needing our love. Now, I may have paraphrased you a little bit there, but
That's a great paraphrase.
I so appreciated it because it really is about, you're talking about the tangle, and there's a lot of different self-images in that tangle, aren't there? There's a lot of ideas of who I am and how I need to show up. And the idea isn't to shut those down, but go ahead and set the table and say, have a seat, boys. What, can I get you something to drink? But you stay over there, but I'm glad to see you, and you're welcome here at my table. So thank you for that, Rōshi. That was helpful and enlightening for me.